A bitter wind blew across the empty streets that night as Margaret pulled her thin shawl tighter around her frail shoulders. Once, she had a warm home, laughter in the halls, and children who clung to her hands. But now, all she had was the cold concrete beneath her feet and the sting of betrayal in her heart. Her own children, whom she had raised with sacrifices too deep to count, had turned their backs on her when she needed them most. They whispered to neighbors that she was a burden, too old to work, too sick to matter. One by one, they shut their doors until there was nowhere left for her to go. Margaret found herself sitting on park benches, shivering at night, clutching an old photograph of her family. Strangers walked past, some tossing her a pitying glance, others ignoring her entirely. But what none of her children knew was that deep in the vaults of a law firm downtown lay a document with her name written in bold letters. A document that tied Margaret to an inheritance worth $60 million. Her late brother, a quiet man no one paid much attention to, had left her everything, every dollar, every property, every share in his company. Yet Margaret never spoke of it. She never boasted, never revealed the secret, for her heart longed not for riches but for love from the very children who had left her to suffer. One icy evening, as her eldest daughter passed her by on the street, pretending not to recognize her own mother, Margaret's tired eyes filled with tears. She whispered under her breath, "One day, you will see what you threw away." And that day was coming sooner than anyone expected. Margaret's nights grew longer, and hunger gnawed at her bones. She often searched through half-empty trash bins behind restaurants, ashamed but too desperate to care. The world seemed blind to her suffering. Yet, in her silence, she carried a secret greater than all their cruelty. Her children, meanwhile, lived as if she no longer existed. The eldest, Clara, threw parties in her spacious home, her laughter echoing through crystal glasses of champagne. The middle son, Daniel, boasted about his hard work while leaning on his wife's wealthy family. And the youngest, Sarah, posted pictures online, smiling in designer clothes, while her own mother wore shoes so torn that rainwater soaked her feet. One morning, Margaret sat quietly on the steps of an old church. The priest offered her bread and warm tea. She accepted with trembling hands, her heart swelling at the rare kindness. "You are not forgotten, my child," the priest said softly. His words clung to her soul like a fragile flame in the dark. Across town, however, a different conversation was unfolding. Inside the polished office of Harper and Lane attorneys, a lawyer flipped through a thick folder. The inheritance papers were still untouched, waiting for Margaret's signature. The clock was ticking. If she did not claim it soon, the assets would be redirected into a charitable trust. But fate has a way of weaving threads together. On that very day, Sarah spotted her mother outside a bakery. Instead of greeting her, she sneered to her friend, "Look at her, what a shame. I am glad she is not in my life anymore." Margaret lowered her gaze, saying nothing, but inside her heart, a storm was rising. She wondered silently, would her children ever regret their choices? Or would the truth have to strike like lightning before they understood the weight of what they had lost? Days turned into weeks, and Margaret's body grew frail. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket she had found discarded on the roadside, trying to keep out the cold. Each night she prayed quietly, not for riches, but simply for strength. Meanwhile, the lawyer, Mr. Lane, grew increasingly concerned. He had tracked Margaret for months, sending letters that were never answered, making calls to numbers long disconnected. At last, he decided to search in person. $60 million cannot vanish with silence, he muttered, locking his briefcase. One evening, he walked through the poorer parts of the city with a photograph in his hand. Passers-by shook their heads, until an old shopkeeper whispered, "I have seen her, near the church steps." At that very moment, Clara and Daniel were in their luxury home, arguing about money. Daniel demanded a loan from his sister, claiming his investments had failed. Clara, sipping expensive wine, mocked him. "You should have worked harder, brother. Not everyone can live off others." Neither of them realized that their mother, whom they had cast aside, was the one who held the key to all their fortunes. Back at the church steps, Margaret felt a strange pull in her heart that evening, as if destiny itself was drawing near. She looked up and saw a man in a gray suit approach. "Margaret," he asked softly. Her eyes widened. No one had spoken her name in months. She hesitated, fear in her voice. "Who are you?" "I am Mr. Lane." Your late husband left something for you. I have been searching everywhere. He opened the folder, showing her the papers. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The numbers, the wealth, $60 million, stared back at her. Her hands trembled. This cannot be real. It is all yours, Mr. Lane assured gently. But there is something you must decide, whether to keep it hidden or let the world, and your children, know. Margaret's heart pounded. For the first time in years, power was in her hands. The question was no longer about survival, but about justice. Margaret sat in silence, clutching the papers that could change everything. Her heart raced, not from joy, but from the storm of memories, her children's cold eyes as they abandoned her, the cruel laughter when she begged for help. Tears welled up, but this time, they were not tears of despair. They were the tears of a mother who had been forgotten, now holding the power to decide her own fate. Mr. Lane waited patiently. Mrs. Harris, the inheritance is legally yours. No one can take it away. The question is, do you wish your children to know? Margaret closed her eyes. She imagined Clara, dressed in her jewels, mocking the poor. She thought of Daniel, chasing money, never sparing a glance for the woman who gave him life. They had left her to suffer. Why should she save them from the same fate? The next morning, Clara and Daniel were invited to a reading at Mr. Lane's office. They arrived, expecting news of a distant relative's wealth, never imagining it had anything to do with their mother. When the lawyer placed Margaret's name before them, both gasped. Daniel laughed bitterly. Our mother. Impossible. She is probably dead on the streets. The door opened. Slowly, Margaret walked in, dressed not in rags, but in a simple yet dignified gown Mr. Lane had purchased for her. Her children froze. Clara's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. Mother, she whispered, trembling. Margaret's voice was calm, steady. Yes. The woman you abandoned is still alive. And now, wealth you never dreamed of belongs to me. Silence filled the room. Daniel stepped forward, stammering, Mother, we were wrong. Please, let us make it right. But Margaret shook her head. No. A fortune cannot buy love, nor erase cruelty. You taught me what family meant to you. Now I will teach you what dignity means to me. With that, she signed the papers, leaving nothing to her children. Instead, she donated vast sums to shelters and food banks, the very places that had once kept her alive. As she left the office, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. But Margaret smiled, not for the attention, but for the freedom she finally held. Her children had abandoned her to suffer, unaware she carried 60 million in her name. Now, the world knew the truth. Sometimes, justice does not shout. It arrives quietly, with the strength of a mother's unbroken spirit.